Hey guys, today's guest is Father Nathan Castle, who is a Dominican friar who's written several books, including Afterlife Interrupted, Helping Stuck Souls Cross Over, and Afterlife Interrupted Book 2, Helping Stuck Souls Cross Over. Father Castle helps the recently deceased who died under traumatic circumstances. Father Castle paints a picture of an afterlife of destinations that are more like schools than permanent destinations. Father, your book could aptly be called Running from the Light, as many of the souls who did not want to cross over through the tunnel and into the light expressed to you that they didn't want their secrets and the things that they were ashamed of, what they had done during their lives, to become public knowledge within the afterlife community. Would you say that's a correct assessment?
In part, it is. You use the example of schools where people learn. Another one, because all of the people that come to me in dreams died sudden violent deaths, some of them really need something that's more like a clinic, some place where there's healing resources, where they can move through a continuum all the way from, if many of them died in car accidents, for example, and if you were in a car accident, there might be an ambulance that comes and scoops you up and brings you to a emergency room without your being conscious. So sometimes they awaken in a place where they're being tended to, and the work that my prayer partners and I do is like the discharge staff at such a place where you've healed to the point that you don't need this level anymore, and you're really ready for something more free, and we just help you kind of gather yourself and get a companion to guide you onto the next place.
It seems like the light is synonymous with your entire life and every secret that you've ever held becoming public knowledge to all the residents within the heavenly realm, and that some souls just can't handle that, it seems.
You know how uh, on a weather report you might hear that tomorrow sunrise will be at 6:22, but if you were watching the horizon at 6:22, you might see light coming before that. It's not like the sun just bursts onto the scene. So sometimes that there's a kind of gradual gradient of moving toward light. And what I've seen is the ones that I deal with, they move at their own pace. They're not shamed, but they're encouraged to come into greater and greater truth. Jesus says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life." And partly folk just need to trust that they're going to be fully loved and accepted regardless of what they felt they needed to hide.
These souls that you encountered explained that it's a gray place, and one of these stuck souls, uh, they illustrated it as like an RMV where no one put any time into decorating, in a place that you wouldn't want to stay very long.
Yeah, that guy
Dull
was really funny.
and very boring place. Um, Although you say most people who die pass seamlessly and do not need your therapeutic services, would you say that's a correct assessment that
I think
most
so.
souls?
Yeah, I when I've been public about this work for maybe about 4 years now. And one of the most important things I say to people who have lost a loved one in a violent event, a sudden event, please don't think that your loved one is stuck. I don't think it's common, but some people, sometimes they're in a trauma loop. Are you familiar with PTSD?
Yes.
And the way that a person in PTSD can have an, a painful looping cognition about the thing that they saw or were a part of. And very often people with PTSD don't sleep well because in the daytime they can at least have some control over what's going on in their imagination. But at night they wake, screaming and stuff. So they're a lot of this depends on what a person imagines, what's in their imagination. St. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle both taught that nothing comes to be until it first exists in imagination. And what we have and how we imagine our lives and our afterlife has a lot to do with what comes next.
There was a gentleman's soul named Dwight that you was a previously dead
Oh
soul
yeah.
that you helped cross over, who got to meet Jesus, and Jesus came to him, you mentioned, where he said that they died in similar ways. They both died naked. This soul was stabbed to death, which is what they did to Jesus on the cross.
Yes.
And you explained that Jesus came to this soul like visiting him in a hospital, like you would visit someone in a prison, that he was healing, and that Jesus came, not the judging Jesus, but the compassionate Jesus. How do you reconcile this compassionate Jesus that's illustrated in your books with this judgmental, and that also this judgment-free zone after death, with the seemingly judgmental side of the Father?
I'm a Dominican, and our motto is Veritas, which is Latin for truth. And that's one of the things that Jesus calls himself. And one of the ways that I sometimes address him in direct speech and prayers, I say, truth, would you please come over here? Because I believe he is the embodiment of truth. Think of what happens in a courtroom. What are we really trying to do when there is a judge and when people have a legitimate role of judging? We're trying to come to the truth of what happened. And that there might have been some wrongdoing, some possible crime. The judge wasn't present to it. The jury wasn't. The lawyers weren't there. But we bring in people who were, and then we ask them what they saw, heard, smelled, whatever. Did you ever study epistemology?
I was a minor in theological studies. I believe there was a small part of the course I studied a little bit.
Well, in order to become a Dominican priest, I had to do a lot of philosophy that I wouldn't have done otherwise. But anybody that's gotten a degree in anything has had to take some courses that they wouldn't have chosen except they'd had to. Anyway, epistemology is the study of knowing. I didn't even know such a discipline existed. But in epistemology, one of the principles of it is human beings know things in one of two ways, either through the direct experiences of one or a combination of the five senses. I saw it, I tasted it, I touched it, I heard it. Or you take the testimony of another person's story. That's why we bring people into a courtroom and ask them to testify. Tell us what you heard, saw it. So in this idea of Jesus being judge, I think he's really just trying to guide us all toward truth. It doesn't necessarily have to be about punishment and locking someone up and throwing away the key, which is sometimes the way people think of judgment. I think of it as just when we come into truth, we come into a better version of ourselves. I think that's when Jesus behaves as judge. I think that's what he's doing. He's trying to help us come into the better knowledge of the better version of ourselves.
Gotcha. And Dwight mentioned that once he got over the shame and the that perceived shame that he was stuck on, he mentioned that after that there were bigger things to think about. There was more life. Do you think he was referring to, maybe, because I know Father Ripperger is a Catholic priest who mentions past lives. Do you think he was talking about past and future lives, or do you think he was thinking more along the lines of just a second life in heaven, and that his previous life on earth just didn't matter as much?
Well, you and I don't know how our death will occur. And it could be that you and I have some awfully tragic story that leaves us broken and, has all of our loved ones grieving a horrible thing. Would you want that to be how you were remembered for all eternity? Would you want to be this tragic figure as though there was nothing of import about you except the way you died? I hope not. If that were to happen to me, I would hope that I get over it, and so do the people that love me, because I'm way more than the accidental circumstance of my death.
In the afterlife, all the souls that you encountered illustrate, that judgment just falls away entirely. And you mentioned this raises a question for life. Can we all just lighten up? Reminds me of a joke. I don't know if you've heard it before. Why can angels fly?
I haven't heard it. Why can angels fly?
Because they take themselves lightly.
There you go. All right. They do
Um,
take themselves lightly. Some of them, I deal with the angels a lot, the guardians, and some of them, they're persons. They're not human persons, but they're angelic persons. They have personalities, and they can be very task oriented and rather formal in the way that they go about their work, or they can be ridiculous and silly. Some of them are kind of giddy because they've been working with this soul all through its life and through its afterlife until this point, and they know that today is like graduation day. They're you're seeing those scenes like during the pandemic where somebody was near death for a long time, but they recovered, and then they're leaving the hospital, and there's they run a gauntlet of nurses and technicians and so on, and there's balloons and stuff. They proceed out. Sometimes it's like that. It's like a celebratory event because this person has been through a lot, but now they're really ready to have the kind of the fun part of heaven or afterlife.
I know that you compared the beginning of your work to the analogy of running into a burning house to save someone. Is that because you're essentially allowing other souls to temporarily, if I may use the term, possess your person, and you're relying on the protection of the Holy Spirit to prevent an imposter from entering instead of the souls that you're trying to assist?
Yeah, let me explain that a little bit. I believe that I have a gift of prophecy, which I can allow my voice. My voice is consecrated. I'm a Dominican. We're the order of preachers, and we lay on the floor of our chapel when we make our vows in the shape of a cross, and we give ourselves completely over to God's work and to God's love. And so I believe my voice is consecrated, and I can allow somebody to borrow it just long enough to talk to one of my prayer partners and say what's going on, how we can help them. And I don't think of that as being possessed. My voice is one gift that God gave me, and I can allow someone to share it. That's all.
What are the sensations when that happens? Is it do you feel, are you an observer or like a passive observer when this happens? Or
No, I call it being co-conscious. I'm not entranced. I'm fairly alert to everything that's going on. One thing is that I only speak English, and so even if the person that I'm assisting in that way doesn't speak English, sometimes they marvel at the fact that they're speaking in English even though they never learned it. They just say, "I'm forming my thoughts like I always did," and they're coming out in this language. Mostly, it doesn't go on for very long. They just need to explain a little bit. They show me a dream, and I write the dream down. But dreamscapes always, the genre of dreams are kind of hazy, and they're not always very specific. And sometimes we'll have a question that we want to ask: Are we the United States or not? Are we helping more than one person today? Sometimes their gender isn't clear. They showed me driving off a road, but they didn't really tell me whether they were male or female. So sometimes we'll ask their guardian to come on the line. First of all, to kind of do a mic test, like you and I, to get this call started, had to do some tech stuff. Not a lot, but we had to. Most times people have never done this before, and sometimes their guardians have never done it before either. But they'll show the one that they love and guide how to do it, and they'll just model it, and it's no big deal. And so they'll come on the line for a few minutes and chat a little bit, and then they'll say, "I'm going to slide to the side now. I'll be assisting you in prayer. The next voice that you hear will be the one that I guard and love." And then we bring in, that soul moves in, and most times introduces themselves, kind of the way that you start most conversations.
there was one soul that mentioned that coming into your dreams was similar to like radio frequencies. I found that very interesting. I guess the metaphysical physics, if I can use that term around
Yes.
that. They use radio frequencies. It's like they had to learn how to enter your dreams at night, and I've had dreams that I think were divinely inspired, and I found that pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'll bet a lot of the people that are in your audience have also. And the physics shifted at the beginning of the 20th century with Einstein and Niels Bohr and a lot of other folk that gave us quantum physics, and there's a field developing now called quantum theology, how to muse about the world around us, including the unseen world. And part of the quantum thesis is that everything is energy. But we used to think that we were either solid, liquid, or vapor, but underneath those three states of matter is energy. And somehow, even at prayer, do you sometimes feel yourself move to something that feels lighter? Do you ever like sink into prayer and move into something that feels more than just your regular thought process or cognition? Do you ever like float into prayer?
I don't think I've ever experienced anything like that. The only thing I could compare it to is when I'm in meditation, in prayer, and you know, sort of like seeing through my mind's eye, where I can sort of almost like it turns into a dream, like hazy state.
All right.
But
Well, any of your audience that has ever been involved in charismatic prayer, you might be in a group, you know, in a praise and worship setting where the leader is leading everyone in the room in song, and the songs in a charismatic setting are very often about praise, and then you'll get to the end, and it has a lyric, and so the lyric has a logical story that it's telling, the way song lyrics do. And then sometimes you'll get to the end of it, and then the prayer leader will either strum their guitar or play a little riff on a keyboard, and the assembly then moves past logical cognition into a state that seems higher, and then they'll move into singing that's beyond words. Have you ever experienced that?
not exactly like that.
Well, if you ever go to a charismatic meeting in a Catholic church or anywhere that people pray in the spirit and use the gift of tongues, it reminds me of that you're still fully present, and you're in loving converse with the Lord. It's just that it moves a level above logical word after word, and it moves into something like the gift of awe, one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit.
Where does hell fit into this whole picture, in your opinion? I know Howard Storm, he's a famous near-death experiencer who his near-death experience impacted me pretty profoundly. He died of a perforated stomach and had a pretty frightening near-death experience where, classic experience, came out of his body, had greeters. But these greeters, they were not the nice greeters. They pretended to be at first. And when they finally got him to a destination, he said he wound it up at in the sewer of the universe. But how does hell fit into this picture?
Well, let me say this, Cody. I try to stick to the data. My undergraduate degree is in sociology and social sciences. And in that discipline, the social scientist stays with the data. And if they move from the data into having an opinion about the data, they label it so that they don't muddy the water. So I try to, in my books, I transcribe everything I record and transcribe so that you've read the first of the two. So, I try to give the reader or the listener the experience that I experienced, and then they can muse about it as they like. I haven't dealt with hell directly, but I always pray my way into these sessions with St. Michael the Archangel, with St. Benedict, St. Dominic, who's my spiritual father, with a whole bunch of the saints, Mary Magdalene, St. Rose of Lima is very helpful, Maximilian Kolbe. Anyway, I believe it's important to protect oneself because I just don't think that everyone is made in God's image and everyone is good. Did you know that Thomas Aquinas taught that God still loves Satan for two reasons?
I did not know that.
Well, Aquinas taught that Satan is still lovable for two reasons. The first of them is, and if I do this in a group, people usually can figure it out in a group. Well, one of them is because Satan is God's creature. And if people say that to me, I say, what kind of creature? Well, he's his child. So Satan is God's child. That's one of the reasons that God loves Satan. The other one is that God just is love. And that's all God does is love. God just is love. And you can't make God not love. It just doesn't work. So I try to treat everyone with dignity and respect, even when I haven't had very much to do with demons. But when I have, after I make sure that I'm safe, I treat them with respect because I believe they deserve it because of their status as children of God. And I remember being taught in Catholic school, and in first grade, second, we were learning about these things. We were told that about hell, but that we would only know if a specific person were in it if God told us so, and God has not told us so. So people like, you might nominate Pontius Pilate or Judas or Hitler, but it would take God revealing that to be a truth, and God has not done that. And then, and when I lead public worship at Mass on Sundays or major feasts, when we do the Creed, I often choose the Apostles' Creed because I like that line in it that's not in the Nicene Creed. It's in the Apostles' Creed that says, he died and he descended into hell, and on the third day rose again from the dead. I just like that idea of Jesus going wherever people are to do whatever saving can be done.
Do you think demons are worthy of love? And I know you said
Absolutely.
respect.
Everyone is. Everyone is.
You mentioned there's no time limits on the other side. You mentioned that in the afterlife, you can even be at two places at the same time. I know Padre Pio could bilocate. So I imagine on the other side, it's also possible. With there being no time constraints on the other side, I'd imagine this is why, a Catholic ex-dead president came to visit you when you were a child.
You mean John Kennedy?
John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, he did. I was 7 years old. And I was in second grade. He was the only Catholic president at that point in history, and the nuns that taught us were just over the moon in love with the president. And his picture was on the wall next to the Pope and Jesus, so they really looked like the Trinity to a first grader. And then I was in Texas. I was growing up in Southeast Texas. When we came in from recess that day, it was 12:30 when he was shot, and I was in that time zone. And when the other second grade teacher came running into the room screaming, and adults don't do that in front of children at school, but she was just completely unglued. She's other teacher came in running and screaming, the president's been shot, and we were all told to kneel next to our desk and pray. And then the principal came in saying, pray, pray, pray for the president. They stopped school and sent us all home. And of course he was dead, but by the time I got home. But I'd have to backtrack. I was taught by my mom to give blessings to people when I was about 3. Did you have the experience of being taught to pray when you were really young?
Yes,
I did. And before I could form prayers on my own, my mom would make me repeat after her at bedtime, and we would send blessings to people. And she explained that a blessing is like a present that you send to people. And because God is everywhere, you can send blessings through God to other people, and they'll always get them wherever they are. And they could be in the next room or the next state or the next country, or they could be people that were living in heaven or after death in purgatory. I didn't learn about purgatory quite that early, but I was thinking about 3 years old. But I was used to praying blessings for people. And then when I learned about death, and that a lot of people, that there's this heaven, hell, or purgatory, and that the way it was explained to me was that most people go to purgatory because most people aren't horrible or perfect. Most people are somewhere in between. That was the way it was taught to me as a little kid. And that made sense. But I was also taught that the people in purgatory have to stay there for a while, but you can help them move through it faster and get to heaven quicker by praying for them. And then one of my teachers taught me that if yours was the prayer that got somebody from purgatory to heaven, you'd have a friend for all eternity. And so, and both of my dad's sisters were Dominican nuns and first grade teachers. So I was just surrounded by well-catechized adults that knew how to talk to children. And they taught me that one of my aunts before my first communion said, "Now listen, I need you to pay attention. Um, God loves everybody, but the prayers of children go straight to God's heart. You have a superpower while you're a child." This is when I'm about to make my first communion, and she said, "You have a superpower, and you're not going to be a child very long. So don't waste your short childhood. Pray for everyone and everything you can think of while you're a child." And then I connected that to the afterlife, and we used to get newspapers in the morning and at night. There was two newspapers a day, and once I began to be able to read, I could see that both of them had an obituary page, and that they had people that had died recently. And then I was growing up in a town where you're pretty much either Catholic or Baptist, and I learned that the Baptists didn't think there was a purgatory, so they didn't pray for their dead. And so I would look to see where they were, where their funeral was, and if they weren't Catholic, I would pray for them. It's like, if your family's not going to pray for you, I will. And I was this busy little kid. I thought that it must be like going to the bank. You know, my dad had a college fund for me, and he would take me to the bank to watch the numbers get bigger, because we never took money out of that account. But when you got to the bank, it was clear that they planned to make you wait. They had those zigzaggedy little rope things where you had to wait your turn, but if you were patient, you'd eventually get up to the front. So I thought purgatory must be like that, and I was going to help people cut in the line. I was going to help them, get there faster somehow. So every night I would fall asleep praying for the souls in line at the bank, the purgatory souls. And then when the president was killed, it was so weird. He had police right next to him on the motorcycles and stuff, and he got shot right in the middle of the street. It was really scary. And then we had been outside playing football and came in to watch Lee Harvey Oswald be murdered on TV in our living room. For a 7-year-old, it was just, and all the adults were crying, and there were pictures from all over the world of people crying, and it was just so weird. But anyway, and then because he was Catholic, the funeral was a mass, and I'd never seen a mass on TV, but I remember watching it, and then I was very intrigued about the eternal flame at the gravesite. How can you make a fire never go out? I'd never heard of that. So anyway, I was trying to absorb it all as a 7-year-old. But then the night of the funeral, we were going to go back to school on Tuesday. We had, they canceled school on Friday and on Monday. But that night it occurred to me, I haven't even prayed for the president since he died. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to pray for President Kennedy. And when I did, something happened. I could see him and he could see me. I'm almost 67 now. That was 60 years ago, but I remember it very vividly.
It's fascinating. When I was a child, not a similar experience, but I agree with you. The prayers of a child are very powerful. And, I had an experience where I said a prayer. I said, "God, if you exist, you better prove it." I was young. I was very young, probably about 16. And he proved it.
Okay.
He proved it to me.
All right.
And that's when I got into mysticism and stuff like that.
Well, part of the reason that I tell these stories out loud, I didn't for many years. I've been doing this for about 25 years, but I was a campus pastor at Stanford and at Arizona State and UC Riverside. I thought that this kind of thing upsets people sometimes. And you know the history of the mystics in the church, it's a really mixed bag. They often end up being, poked and probed and punished. And, anyway, I just thought this might just be better done in the, down on the down low, just go about it quietly. And then eventually I got to the point where I thought, no, I felt like the Lord was telling me, go ahead, don't speak of it. In part because so many people in the churches and outside the churches have spiritual experiences that are real and true that they hide. And I think it makes us all lonelier, more isolated from one another when we don't live our truth. And people can feel like they're the only one, or I must be a freak or something like that. And when people tell the stories like you just did at 16 or mine at 7, oftentimes it gives others permission to say, it seems like this is a safe place, so that you would not make fun of me. Let me tell you what happened to me.
It's fascinating you mentioned that, the persecution aspect of these experiences, and also um, a lot of the saints were persecuted, and they were all mystics as well, which is interesting. Um,
Yeah, it doesn't happen all the time, but there are plenty of stories where people were silenced or, encountered troubles of different kinds. And many of the people that populate the four gospels died martyrs' deaths after manifesting different kind of spiritual gifts after the resurrection.
I know that some of the souls that you helped mention that they're on the other side. There's no finances, nothing to
Yeah,
worry. There's no money to worry, money issues ever.
right.
You get to choose the way that you look. I thought that I've heard it before. I think it's really fascinating to think about that. You can pick your age, exactly how you appear. I know that there are a few souls that mention that to you.
Yeah, like you're what time is it where you are now? It's close to midday.
Yeah, it's 11:45.
Wasn't there a version of you a few hours ago that would have had bed hair or that, would have been in, you know, a t-shirt or something like that? We can change the way we appear to fit the context. And uh, in the afterlife, I've seen people that will show up looking like the photo that was on the living room wall. If it's your granddad that's coming to help you cross, he'll show up looking like he did on his wedding day or in his military uniform, although he might have lived another 60 years. He'll first show up to kind of familiarize you with a version of him that you recognize, and then he'll morph into something happier or healthier or whatever. They can do that quickly.
Um, and you also mentioned there was a soul that you helped. Said that well, she struggled during her life. She was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and once she died, there was an immediate release of that body that craved alcohol and
Yes.
drugs.
Yeah, there's so much of that. And right now, fentanyl. I get many crossings that involve drug abuse deaths. One of the things about uh, addictions is they operate at the cellular level. You have cells in your body that crave your drug of choice, and that's part of why it's so hard to give up cigarettes or alcohol or any other addictions, as there's your body is screaming for this thing that's bad for you. And one of the consequences of dying is that you leave the body. So you bring with you the psychological and emotional components of it, but you do get a little bit of relief, at least from the cellular part of it. And then ones that I've helped, you remember, I'm all the way at my prayer partners are all the way at the end of a line. We haven't done the therapy work. Others have done that. We're helping them out the door. You know how Jesus talks about you're harvesting what you didn't sow. uh, we didn't do all this other work. Other people did, and we're just part of the harvesting team. We're getting them out the door. But they still have to work through the way that the 12 steps of AA do. After you attain a certain amount of sobriety, it's time to circle back around and see what damage you did to other people while you were drinking and drugging. But even then, it needs to be done in an orderly way, and it needs to um, involve other people, not just you. The fact that you want to apologize right now doesn't mean that it's timely. Somebody might have had a restraining order against you, and you have no business going to them to tell them you're sorry. Uh, but in the afterlife, there's a propriety, and they also know kind of a sequence of what would be wisest. If you do need to start doing some relationship mending, they'll get you started on the easier ones, or the ones where people are receptive to your apology. But everything can be healed, and nobody is forced to move along with the rest of the class, or nobody's told you should have made more progress by now, or why can't you keep up, or why aren't you as smart as your brother? Any of those things. Everybody's just led through a process that is beautiful. That's what I've seen.
That's very interesting. You said when you were doing a sermon, When your life is done, do you belong in the trash or in the recycling?
Yes.
So you've already answered the question that we are all, no matter what you've done in this life, we all have some redemption value. And I would agree with that because when Howard Storm, even when he was greeted and brought to the sewer of the universe, he met Jesus, and Jesus told him there were options for him. You know, he didn't have to stay in that place that those people brought him. There were other options, and he confirmed the Catholic doctrine of purgatory. And you know, I tend to lean towards your depiction of afterlife destinations being schools rather than permanent destinations of either being condemned or damned or unable to escape.
Well, again, I'm just going with the experiences that I've had, and I have not been given a guided tour of the whole universe or the entire afterlife. I just try to stay in my lane and report to people who are interested in knowing about it, what I've experienced. But um, I do believe that the Lord reaches out to everyone, and I just think doesn't give up, just keeps trying every key at the lock to see what it is that might bring us into light.
Are you working on any new book currently?
I'm working on two. I want another one in this Afterlife Interrupted series. There are two books in that series already, and I hope to have a next book out by the summer, middle of 2023 on this topic. I've started a podcast just at the beginning of October, and I hope to be releasing some stories that are not already public. I don't tell anybody's story unless I have their permission to tell it. And the first time that we meet a person, first it's the dream, and then it's the crossing prayer that we do with them. But it seems inappropriate in the middle of this crossing to say, "Oh, Cody, don't leave yet. I'm writing a book, and I want to get your story to." We go back a little bit later and say, you know what, we think we go back in prayer only once. I don't chat up people who have died just for my amusement, but I believe that's an important question to say. Would you mind if your story were made public so that it might help other people? And so I'm working on a third book in this series, and I'm also working on a book on John's Gospel with the kind of playful thesis that what if it weren't a short story? What if it were the script of a play?
What's the name of your podcast?
The Joyful Friar. Thank you for asking. That's Dominic's nickname. St. Dominic was known as the Joyful Friar. And when I was a young Catholic guy, I went to a Protestant college, Trinity University in San Antonio, after going through Catholic schools until then. And during those years, I began to feel a call towards the following of Jesus in the ministry, but my prayer group was the only Catholic in it for a long time. And it was out of that experience that I began to discern, yeah, I think I'll stay Catholic. And then when I started looking at orders and dioceses, it was so many of them. And it was kind of, when I eventually found that Dominic was known as the Joyful Friar, I said, that's it. I want to go where the joy is. I want to be a joyful friar because I believe the good news is joyful. So anyway, I went into prayer and asked St. Dominic if it was okay to use his nickname, and I got the permission I needed. He said, I never called myself that anyway. Other people said that about me. Go ahead.
How can people reach out to you if they need to? Are you open if my
Yeah, I'll
audience
tell you
reaches out?
exactly how. I'm on my email all the time. My website is my name. It's Nathan, Nathan dash Castle, Castle. So Nathan-Castle.com. On it, it has a contact tab, and it will show you, if you click on it, it asks a few little questions like, what time zone do you live in? If I wanted to give you a call, I don't want to call you in the middle of the night. Where do you live? Basics. And I ask that people not ask me questions that are answered in my books. There just aren't enough hours in the day to explain things I've already explained. So if people want to ask me questions about what I do, I say, please read at least the first of my 2 Afterlife books first, or listen to it, because it's on Audible also. And then after that, if you have a question for me, I'll do my best to reply to you. I don't like Facebook Messenger. And the more podcasts I'm on, there are comments, like on YouTube or whatnot. And I just don't have enough hours in the day to chase down every place that somebody makes a comment or asks a question. If you really want me to reply to you, go on my website, send me an email. That's the simplest way.
Well, Father, I just want to thank you for coming on the show, and I wish you the best of luck with your upcoming books.
Well, thanks, and God bless you for the good work you're doing.